Welcome. I want everybody to know this is really we want this to be like an informal event. We hope that this is kind of the format as we go forward as well. So in the middle of this, feel free to get another beer, another pizza, another whatever. If you have to take a call, step out, grab another glass of wine, perfect. I'm Shannon White, and I want to introduce Kyle McGhee, who's going to be the moderator tonight, and you'll hear from Kyle in just a minute. So I wanted to introduce you. I want to invite you to continue to come to Gen Forward meetings and welcome you to this first educational event of the Gen Forward Network. And yes, for those of you who came to the last one, I did just say Gen Forward instead of Give Forward. And so we've changed, we have decided to change the name to better, we've also created a tagline that better associates ourselves with Genesee County. So Gen has two meanings. Gen is in generation, the next generation of givers, and Gen is in Genesee. So that's where we have come up with this. We liked the logo is up for those of you can see, and it's on the Facebook page as well, and also on the homepage of the Community Foundation's website. And so our tagline is the next generation giving in Genesee County, which is the action message that describes our goal. To be a network of emerging leaders in our community that's giving for the greater good. And I think all of you believe in that or you wouldn't be here tonight. As of today, we have 41 memberships representing over 10,000 in grant-making potential. And I would say we have actually a few more members than that. Some have joined as a family, so it's $100 more if you join, but then you still only have one vote. And so we have some members. Can you wave your hands if you're here? Excellent. So thank you for returning. And for those of you who are new, we hope that by the end of tonight you will say, yes, no doubt, I want to be a member of that group. For your membership contributions to be included in this year's grant-making pool, we've set a registration deadline of August 30th. And then we will make a grant after that time. So money in goes out the same fiscal year. And so anyway, we're making greater impact, one member at a time. We hope that you all will invite a friend to join, because if you all invite a friend to join, we can double our membership, which is just double the benefit out into the community in Genesee County. And we're here tonight really to listen and learn more about our community needs. The presenters with us this evening were invited. Thank you for coming, presenters. Based on the survey of the membership, you all who rank ordered your own community priorities. So for the evening, for the format is we're going to have a brief overview of the landscape, kind of Flint and Genesee County, the trends and gaps in the 4 top areas that are identified in the survey, and they're up on the board. So the top community interests that you all identified were education, youth development, crime and public safety, and employment and small business development. We have a panelist kind of to speak about each of these areas. And then we'll have the panel presentation and discussion to deepen our understandings of these issues, and you're going to really get kind of like a 50,000 feet level at tonight's discussion. There will be time for question and answers along the way, so please, if you have questions, either ask them at the time or remember them and ask them at the end, whichever. And we'll finish with a wrap-up discussion, and we can continue to talk freely after that. We'll conclude like right around 7 o'clock. My 2-year-old's birthday is tonight, so I'm going to take him to dinner. So I promise that we'll be out of here on time. So anyway, please help me welcome Kyle, who's going to be our moderator. He is a formation committee member, and he's also on the steering leadership committee of this group. So.
Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles, overseeing planning and redevelopment efforts in 2 communities immediately adjacent to one of the busiest ports in the United States. She also spent more than 7 years with LA's Department of City Planning, updating community plans, writing development standards, revising code provisions, and processing planning cases. She has a bachelor's degree in metropolitan studies from Michigan State University and a master's degree in urban planning from UCLA. So apologies to all of the Wolverines and Trojans that may be in the audience to this hunter. But Megan, I'd first like to ask you, as someone who has parachuted in and just gotten re-immersed in all of Flint and Genesee County, what's going on, the trends, the issues, the problems, and the solutions. Where do you currently see the lay of the land in our community? What do you see as some of the challenges that we are going to be facing over the next few years?
Great, yeah, I think something that's probably no mystery to most of you, we've been hearing it and you can see it in the landscape. Obviously the big challenge that the city of Flint faces is just rapid population. At its height, the city of Flint had almost 200,000 people, and today we're probably under 100,000 people, and that's left a lot of blight and abandoned properties, and property values have declined significantly over that time. And it has resulted in a significant loss in revenue for the city. We've lost about $9.4 million in revenue since 2006. So the city is grappling with trying to address huge challenges, blight, crime, and issues with education with very limited resources. And a lot of what we're experiencing too in terms of declining revenue, the school district is experiencing as well. And so that's put a lot of pressure on the public school system. The Flint community schools, of the school-age population in Flint, and remember that's a reduced school population because of the population decline, only about 54% of those students attend a Flint community school. We don't really know, it's hard to track exactly where those students are going. Some may be going out of the city to other schools within the county, some are in private, but some might not be attending school at all. And so those are some of the challenges as it relates to education, and I think we really have to think how we can address that issue, because we're seeing more and more the challenges with very high dropout rates, and even just the adult literacy rates in Flint are extremely low. It's estimated, we don't have real numbers, but it's estimated that the functional literacy rate or the functional illiteracy rate in the city of Flint is about 35%. So that means 35% of adults in the city of Flint are functionally illiterate. And that's a huge challenge moving forward. In terms of youth, I think this kind of correlates to where the youth are in the city of Flint. There are tremendous challenges with youth poverty. A lot of it associated with growing up in families that are having challenges in getting jobs because they don't have the skill level. In 2010, about, I think, 63% of Flint's youth live below the poverty level. 63%. So we have tremendous challenges in terms of the youth poverty rates, and then, as I mentioned before, the education challenges with the school district, with the number of kids that have dropped out. And that, of course, correlates to crime, because, as the kids are dropping out of school, or the families are challenged with making a living, and they're more likely to resort to crime. So, and then finally, employment. We've had some really great bright spots in terms of economic development in the city of Flint, but we're hearing a lot from employers that the population that live in the city really don't have basic skills to take some of those jobs. We hear from employers all the time that they do want to hire Flint residents, but they just don't have the basic skills. And when I say basic skills, I mean simple reading and writing and understanding directions. And so even sort of lower skill level work, our residents and the children aren't in a position to take those positions. And then finally, I want to say that I think this kind of youth issue is really something that we as a community need to focus on. And it really, through our master plan process, has really risen to the top as one of the fundamental issues moving forward, to really figure out how can we provide the supportive services to youth and their families, because we're relying on the youth for our future, and if we don't do something now, as bad as things look today, they're going to look a lot worse in the future.
And so Megan, I think I was told that you may have to leave us before the end of the program, but with education services for the youth and their families, would you say that's the greatest area of opportunity for us the next few years here in the community?
Yeah, I think it is, because we're really seeing that educational attainment is so closely tied to employment. I mean, if you look at the unemployment numbers, you always see that the more education you have, the more likely you are to have a job, to retain a job, and have a better paying job. So there's such a close correlation between education, employment, and poverty. So we really think that the idea of supporting youth and their families and providing basic needs, because you have to provide basic needs first, and then augmenting as much as possible the education for our families is really important. And I think one of the ideas that have really kind of risen to the top is the idea of having learning centers or learning labs within the neighborhoods to help kind of augment the education services that are being
So
provided.
I have a question.
If I could,
Or are we not taking questions?
we will have questions, but we want to give each of the
Okay.
panelists a turn to speak, and then we'll have a Q&A
Okay.
for all of them. And Megan, you have to leave early. Your email address, if someone does have a question to you, is?
Yeah, it's mhunter@thecityoflint.com.
Okay, yeah. So if you have a specific master plan or planning City of Flint question, please email Megan or ask one of the city members afterwards, and we'll give you that email address.
Is it the City of Flint or City?
Oh, City of Flint, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Cityoflint.com. And actually, if you took a frequently asked questions, which is that page with kind of a blue circle on it, my information is on there.
Yeah. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to have each of our panelists, I'll give you a brief introduction of who they are, just so if you may not be familiar with them, you can know that. And then we're going to ask them two key and I think critical questions for today's discussion as we look at those four top community interest areas. And the two questions for us in the Gen Forward Network are to briefly describe the landscape that you see in our community in your field, and then to identify what program or project could be affected positively with the $10,000 community grant. Because with Gen Forward, that's the range that we're working with, and so we want to know how can our dollars best be utilized in your area of interest in your chosen field. And so our first panelist to speak to those two questions is Elizabeth Jordan. Elizabeth Jordan is a lifelong resident of Flint and serves as a program officer at the Ruth Mott Foundation, where she's been since 2005 in that capacity. In addition, she co-teaches a class at the University of Michigan-Flint on cultural competency in healthcare. Elizabeth is active in the community and serves on the Flint Planning Commission, and as the city works with Megan in developing our first comprehensive master plan since 1960. She is committed to building healthy relationships and equitable outcomes with people across the spectrum of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, disability, religion, and age. So Elizabeth, with your wide and deep experience here in our community, talk about the landscape that you see currently and looking forward over the next year or two.
Well, thank you. One of the things that I use to look at the landscape is what I would call a social equity lens. And so I'm going to be spending a couple minutes just introducing what is the concept of a social equity lens, and then how could you apply that using the example of employment, which is one of the areas that this group was interested in. There is going to be a presentation on the screens. I know that it's hard to see for many, so there's also handouts that I do have a couple of things to show on the slides, and I hope that you'll follow along. The first is that it's important to establish that there is a difference between the concepts of equality and equity. Oftentimes, folks are familiar with equality. It has to do oftentimes with what goes into a process. It's input focus. Does everybody have the same opportunity? Does everybody have the same chance to do something? Or do we have equal amounts of funding going for various things? And that's well and good for some things, but in situations where there might be some underlying social factors, it's more important to look at the outcome versus the input. With equality, sometimes it lends to approaches, and this could translate into programs that are kind of one size fits all, whereas an equity approach emphasizes the need to tailor what you're doing to meet the specific needs of the population you're serving. And so a quick example of how we kind of intuitively apply an equity framework in our daily lives would be like feeding your family. If you've got a 7-year-old kid, you're going to feed them a certain type of food, a certain amount of food that is suited to what they need. You're not going to give the same food to the 7-year-old that you would to a 7-month-old. And so that kind of makes sense in that practical experience, but sometimes when we're translating into like a programmatic framework, it can be a little bit harder to tease out how do you appropriately tailor the way that you engage in order to meet the unique needs of that population. So there's kind of 3 components of this social equity lens. First is you got to recognize that there are social differences that do matter. And so we'll walk through in a moment for employment what some of those social differences that matter could be. But you might find that whether you're looking at employment or education or health or any number of different factors, there's going to be some social things that make a difference. The second part is analyzing the outcomes by those social differences. And then the third is based on your analysis of those outcomes, taking focused, intentional steps to close the gaps that exist in terms of the actual results that different populations have. Okay, so with employment as an example, some of the differences that matter. Geography matters in terms of employment outcomes. Education, race, age, gender, and disability. We'll have a chance right now to walk through the first 4, and that'll give you a sense of it. But certainly if you're interested, I can talk to you further afterwards about some of the gender and disability factors as well. So if you have before you the first chart there, it talks about analyzing outcomes by social differences in terms of education. Now, as you might suspect, certainly your level of education does have a bearing in terms of your likelihood of being unemployed. And some of the information that's available actually breaks down also by geography. So for the following tables, you're going to be able to see what are some of the differences for people in Flint versus those that live in the out-county areas. So in terms of education, if you live in the out-county area, there's kind of very predictable, steady rate of decline in unemployment for every increase in your level of education. So if you have less than a high school diploma, you have a really high level of unemployment if you live in the suburbs. If you have a high school diploma, it's significantly less, some college less, and then bachelor's degree, the lowest level of unemployment at all. If you look at the Flint column, there is some decrease, but you notice that in Flint there's geographically something different in terms of how much of a decrease is there really between having a high school diploma and having some level of college. So for example, somebody who lives in Flint who might have an associate's degree has a much higher rate of unemployment than somebody who's got that same qualification that lives in the out-county areas. Knowing that, doing that analysis, might position us to figure out how to better serve certain pockets of our community. This is kind of a complicated one. Because we had so many changes in terms of the economy with the recession, I thought it would be important to show you 2 years' worth of data. And this is from the American Community Survey. So the red numbers there, those are the 2010 figures. And you can see that for 2010, if you were African American living in Flint, if you were African American living in Out County, or if you were white in Flint, you had about a 30% unemployment rate. The only group that had a significantly different unemployment rate was if you were white and living in the Out County areas.
Sorry, what's Out County?
That would be the Genesee County outside of the city of Flint.
But within Genesee County?
Yes, so it would be any part of Genesee County that is not the city of Flint. And so you can see that looking at the difference between what happened in 2010 and 2011, every group had significant reductions except for African Americans in Flint. Even after the other groups started to see a recovery, African Americans still had a very high unemployment rate. So here's looking at age groups. We certainly know that age is the difference. Young people, hugely impacted. Highest unemployment rates of all. And so once we know these things, once we've done that analysis, it's important to take focused steps to close those gaps. And that's where your funding can make a difference is really important. If you have the opportunity to make a difference with your funding, you want to spend it on programs that affect the most impacted folks. There's this concept of universal design. If you can design a process or a program that effectively meets the needs of the people with the most barriers, you can ensure everybody has that chance to participate. Designing programs to meet those specific needs. So that could be internal to the group. For instance, if you're concerned about unemployment with young people, you want to think about what are some of the things that could specifically strengthen the position of young people. So you might have job skills training programs targeted towards them. You might have transportation assistance targeted towards them. But, and this is a really key piece that often gets overlooked, if you really want to make a difference, you have to also look at changing the environment in which that population finds themselves. And by that I mean, particularly with race as an example, there was a fascinating study called Are Emily and Greg More Employable Than Lakeisha and Jamal? And they did this test of sending out resumes with equal qualifications where the only difference was the perceived race of the person submitting it. And the average white person had to give 10 resumes for a callback versus 15 for an African American. That equates to 8 more years of experience in order to get a callback. So we got to also
8 more?
8 more years. So having a white sounding name was basically the equivalent of 8 more years of job experience in terms of how employers responded to the resume. So we have to look at how are we training employers to be fair. And that's not something that's based on the population, it's based in our society. And so addressing both are critical.
Well, I know we had a short time, but Elizabeth, you've given us a wealth of knowledge to dissect, both for the Q&A later as well as for our later deliberations. I next want to turn to someone who I've known for quite a while and who is an expert in his field, and that is Mr. Tendaji. So you ought to know what I was saying. Technically, all 3 of our next panelists could be he's who are experts in their fields, but the next expert in their field after our first expert, or second expert, actually, we all panel of experts, Mr. Tendaji Ganges. Originally from Trenton, New Jersey, Tendaji Ganges has spent a 42-year career in pre-college, preparatory, and college support services as a teacher, mentor, counselor, parent advocate, program manager, administrative, and senior executive. He has worked in New Jersey, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, and Michigan at 6 colleges and universities. Active on numerous campus committees, he is also very engaged in many local community groups and initiatives. He also serves as a board member for the Urban League of Flint and is a member of the Midwest Regional Foundation Board of Directors and our college Board of Trustees in Ohio. He has served for the last 18 years as the Executive Director of Educational Opportunity Initiatives at the University of Michigan-Flint. So, Tendaji, as you think of education, where's the landscape in Flint? Megan's given us some of the statistics, particularly in regards to our public school system. But as you think about the transition to post-college opportunities, where do we stand in the city of Flint, Genesee County? And then secondly, where would you think we could best direct a $10,000 grant?
First of all, I want to try to just add a little caveat. It's easy in these kinds of discussions to accentuate the negative, to look at what's wrong with Flint, what's wrong with the area, and the problems that we face. One of the things I'd like to say very loudly is there's a great deal of talent, and a great deal of caring, and a great deal of energy and passion still left in Flint. And we just have to find ways to continue to accentuate that. So as we consider putting together initiatives of whatever kind, let's presume excellence is still what we're shooting for, and that people do care about that. People do care about solutions. So let's not presume that we're only working against the negative. There's a lot of positivity out there that is important to us in this kind of work, regardless of the field or area that you're working in. That being said, we're also struggling with ignorance and apathy. We are still struggling with silos and turf issues. We're still struggling with people who have gone from being broke to being poor. And we are also struggling with the various bookends, what I call bookends, our babies versus our elders. We're the 2 most vulnerable populations that we seem to be dropping the ball with. And when we consider education and what that means, it's a P20 kind of arrangement. It's all the way from preschool to college and beyond. And we need to recognize that there are many serious and frequent slams that have impacted area school districts, has helped establish a climate of instability and uncertainty in virtually every population that you can think of: teachers, counselors, administrators, as well as the parents, the students themselves. Not to mention how devastated many of the administrators feel and how helpless they feel in trying to address the needs. We've seen school closings and transfers to other schools create a lack of belonging and ownership among many of the students. Transferring students to a school for what we call discards, or students that are in trouble, is going to present us with some unique challenges when we concentrate a lot of students who have had difficulties in one setting and putting them all in one building as is planned for this coming year. It indeed becomes a question of, do we enhance that negativity and poor attitudes, or do we find ways to interrupt it? The elimination of flexibility and addressing students' needs in their own schools and communities continues to be a pervasive problem because we are moving students out of their areas of comfort into challenging areas where they are less prone to work to achieve when they're primarily trying to save themselves and being very defensive about some of the circumstances that they're being faced with. The lack of consistency among teachers, counselors, administrators, given turnover and replacements and moving about the system to balance this, that, and the other as buildings are being closed, is really problematic. Indeed, we're looking in some situations, a powder keg situation, in at least one high school and 2 of the elementary and middle schools, meaning that the administrators there are really scrambling now to figure out how to stave off what they see and perceive to be a very volatile situation coming up over the next several months. Student learning seems to be the last thing on the list. We see all kinds of concerns and issues around questions of buildings, budgets, and contracts, but we have very few conversations about what is happening with the young people in our schools, and are they in fact learning the skills that they need to be whole? Are they learning the skills they need to be productive members of our society? Are they becoming problem solvers? Are they learning to work well with one another? Or are they simply struggling to survive to get through the system? Needless to say, the external and supplementary agencies and organizations are in a constant race trying to figure out ways to interrupt and to provide services for these populations as a supplement to existing services through the schools. As they have lost personnel and parent advocates and the like, programs at churches and organizations and institutions are struggling to try to keep up and patch those holes. The problem with a patchwork system, of course, is just that. It's patchwork. And students are not fooled by that patchwork. They know that it's not a comprehensive, holistic way to do it. Is that 1 minute left, or is that I missed the first one?
You have 1 minute.
Thank you so much. Let me look real quick at what we could do with some money. And the very first thing I want to say, and primarily I think it's the most important thing, and that is that we're not going to solve this only with money. And we're not going to solve it by funding the magic bullet. It is going to be a way of finding out what is working and needs a little bump over the hill to provide that extra additional support to get some things done. For example, there are programs and activities that are operating in various agencies and institutions and community groups that need a little bit extra to help. They have great services, but they don't have transportation for the students to come get those services. A small grant to get some bus passes into a place can solve those problems. So in other words, we need to concentrate on looking for where we can make the most difference very quickly and enhance those so we can get some momentum up and build and work towards something else. Be the glue that facilitates the collaboration between multiple initiatives that simply need structured means and support to make a difference. And there are many, many such organizations and community groups that are operating with very few dollars or no money at all that would benefit from small grants that would make a difference. Enhance existing momentum.
You had, was that in the sentence? You said over the bump. Was that the next part? That's what I see in your notes.
Oh, yeah. But I didn't need that.
Okay, all right. Our next speaker is Mr. David McGhee. David is an award-winning mentor, speaker, consultant, college instructor, and former program director for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Greater Flint. His life's mission is to be a voice for the voiceless, chart a path for the lost, shine a light on the invisible, and give hope to the forgotten. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that he is also the husband of the lovely young lady sitting to my so
you better blow. He saved me some time.
So David, briefly thinking about youth development, describe the landscape that you see here in our community, and if you could give us an idea, a project or program that can be positively affected by a $10,000 grant.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I approach things a little differently sometimes. Who likes animals, man? By show of hands, just who likes animals?
Depends on the animal.
Depends on the animal. Right. I'm glad you said that.
I didn't raise your hand in the back.
So if you like animals, beyond cats and dogs, and pay attention to the animal planning, things like that. One of the things that you'll find out is that lions hate cheetahs. Lions hate cheetahs, right? So the reason that the lion hates the cheetah is because the lion knows that even though he's the king of the jungle, if he sees a piece of meat and the cheetah sees the same piece of meat, the lion may be the king, but the cheetah can what?
Outrun him.
And outrun him to the meat. And that's why the lion hates the cheetah, right? So the lion tries to get a little smart and he says, you know what? That's okay, Mr. Cheetah. I'm going to let you get the meat, and after you get the meat, I'm going to run up behind you and eat you and the piece of meat. And then that's when the cheetah comes back and he says, you know, all is a loss, Mr. Lion, because not only has God given me supernatural speed to outrun you to the meat, he's also given me supernatural strength to climb a tree and perch myself on a branch to where you can't get me, Mr. Lion. And that's why the lion hates the cheetah. So when a lion sees a pack of baby cheetah cubs, what do you all think he does? He kills them. He doesn't talk to them. He doesn't play with them. He doesn't try to have a conversation with them. He kills them. The lion kills the baby cheetah cubs. He kills them before they're able to grow up and compete. So ladies and gentlemen, when we think about youth development, that's essentially what's happening to our young people, right? Some in a literal sense, some are literally losing their lives. But some of their opportunities are being killed before they're having an opportunity to grow up and compete. So our job as a collective unit, in my humble opinion, we have to identify the lions. We have to identify the lions that are in their lives that are trying to kill them before they're able to complete. So I know the second part of the question, I'm supposed to tell you what you need to do with $10,000. To be perfectly honest, I don't know, right? But to be even more brutally honest, I don't care. And I'm not saying I don't care in a negative sense. I'm saying I don't care as long as we do something to identify the lions, right? Before they're able to continue to kill our young people. And then even as we look in our own lives, we all have lions in our lives that come to try to kill us before we're able to give birth to our dreams. So we have to eliminate the barriers, and by doing that, we have to do what I call manufacture the moment. Right? I remember when I was like 12 years old, we were shopping at Farmer Jack, if anybody remembers Farmer Jack. I'm saying it like I'm just extremely old, but we were at Farmer Jack and I wanted something. And my mom, she didn't have the money to buy it, right? I thought she did, so I said, Mom, hey, I really want this. She said, first she tried to be nice. Well, baby, you don't need it. You got one at home. And I'm thinking, like, I don't got one at home. I really want this. So long and the short of it is she kept trying to go around the way to tell me, son, I am broke. Right? So I said, Mom, just write a check. You got all them checks in your purse. I'm thinking that just because she had the checks, that equaled money. And that was a teachable moment for my mother and me, because that's when I got it. That's when I got it. And I say that to say all of us have had moments in our lives where life made sense, right? Where we got it. But our young people, unfortunately, we can't wait for them to have that moment. We have to manufacture that moment for our young people. How do we manufacture that? That's what we're here to talk about today. So do I have all of the answers? No. Am I a Rhodes Scholar who declares to possess a much deeper understanding of the world than anyone else? No. But what I will say is that whatever it is we want to do, we have to act on it now. We can't approach things business as usual, because business has become quite unusual. for the most marginalized individuals in this community. So I just want to encourage us to continue to think differently. I think I got about 30 seconds left. I see Kathy looking at us. But encourage us to think differently, and along the same lines as Tendaji was speaking of and Elizabeth was speaking of, how do we make sure that people can get over the hump, right, and eliminate those barriers for people. So if you don't remember anything else that I said, let's make sure that we manufacture the moment for our young people.
All right. Our final expert is First Lieutenant Matt Bolger. I thought the F/Lieutenant is first, not former, right?
That is, yeah.
Okay, then let's get you a job. First Lieutenant Bolger is the commander of the Michigan State Police Post here in Flint. He is responsible for administering the Michigan State Police's efforts relating to the Secure Cities Partnership, which includes uniformed, proactive police patrols, detective resources, and community service troopers in the city of Flint. And so, First Lieutenant Bolger, as you think of public safety and all that entails, and all that you see both on the streets, in the community, as well as the data that you see back in the office, what do you see the landscape of public safety in its totality here in Flint and the wider Flint community?
I'm going to start off by saying my troopers have to call me lieutenant and everybody else can call me Matt. I didn't make the rules, but our job is a lion hunter. And that's basically what we're trying to do. As far as the crime and the state of public safety in the city of Flint, I don't know how many of you, Megan put this together. And this shows the homicide offenses in the city of Flint from 2005 to 2011. Homicide is the most, I guess, the flashiest violent crime that we deal with. But for every homicide, there's 10 plus non-fatal shootings. There are 20 felonious assaults. There are 40 simple assault and batteries, 4 rapes. So the violent crime as a greater package in Flint is kind of what we're trying to do and trying to be creative and address. But this map that you see here looks a lot like our hotspot policing map that we use. And we're sending troopers into these high crime areas in the city of Flint. And to an area, they're very similar to this. And we're looking at all the violent crime. So we have a lot of things that are contributing to the crime problem in Flint. Everybody on this table would have little thoughts as far as what is the crime, what is the crime problem, or what's the source of the crime problem. It's a number of issues. It's blight. Blight is a significant problem. I've been out on calls where you have crack house, abandoned house, burned out basement, grandma's house. We're there for grandma's house, and everybody in this room is there for grandma's house because grandma's raising the 2 grandbabies too. The other problem is work, lack of available work, lack of work that people are qualified for. And that impacts the youth too. And the training programs that are available to youth and trying to prepare them for a life. They're trying, we have small pockets and we have a large concentration or a large number of different groups doing different things in the city for our youth. Different clubs, different church groups, different organizations trying to help youth, but they're doing, their clientele's 20 or 40 small little groups that are trying to do what they can. The boys are trying to avoid a specific thing, but there's one group that is huge, and that state police have partnered with, and it's Boys and Girls Club in the city of Flint. They're one of many that they're trying to do what they can. The other problem is I say this all the time, there's a lack of value for human life. And we see this a lot. And I don't know, I wish I knew what to do to address that. But when I was growing up, if there was a dispute over a cell phone, you might get in an argument, you might get in a fight, but you certainly didn't go and get your boyfriend and bring him back so he would kill the 2 people that you think stole your cell phone. And that's a real case that we have.
Can I ask that? I mean, I'm reading this homicide map. You all have more than 97 homicides per square mile have happened in almost 10 hotspots over the last 6 years. Is that
that's Per square mile,
This,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is 600 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
No, this
7,
is extrapolate. It's. I forget. I'm trying to think of the term to use.
But is that 800 homicides in the last 6 years?
No, in the last 6 years we've had. Wow.
350,
Yeah.
360.
It's per square mile,
Yes.
and that's why it looks the way that it
So
does.
there could be some overlap.
Yeah.
Statistically, it over imprints an area because it's a higher concentration in every
Gotcha.
place. So it's relative to other areas.
Okay. Sorry.
Give him another 30 seconds. Come on.
To help move us to a solution-oriented NCAP, you've highlighted and I think touched on maybe possible solutions or ways that we can be helpful with that $10,000. It may be coordination of disparate groups, scalability of successful small groups, and conflict resolution. Are those areas that you think our $10,000 would be helpful?
Definitely, and job or I guess adulthood preparation. It doesn't necessarily need to be job preparation, but adulthood preparation. You know, the city of Flint runs a program for at-risk young adults, and to get in the program, you basically have to be a criminal. You have to be committing crime, and we have enough package to send you to prison, and then we have like come to Chief Lot meeting basically, and we set them down and say, you're going to prison unless you change your ways. And it's like probation without getting arrested. You know, that program's good, but it's only one program out there. There's a number of programs that I'm personally aware of from the groups that I sit on, where they take at-risk youths, you know, boys, girls, 14 and up, 12 to 16, you know, whatever, and try and prepare them for to be a successful member of the community. But there's a lot of those kind of groups, and I don't know if it's better, you know, economy of scale to kind of bring all those groups together, or to concentrate on one that has been really successful, because there are a number of them that are very successful, and pick a winner and go after them. But all the things that I've mentioned can use this.
Great. My schedule says that next, Shannon, you're doing the moderation for Q&A?
I don't know. I guess so.
That's what's on the
That's
on the schedule. So next up, I'll call up our formation chair, Shannon White. Thank you.
Okay, so anyway, I'd like to thank everyone for a meaningful discussion and
Q&A.
sorry. Well, I don't. Do we
They
have any?
switched-
We don't have any particular questions.
No, they switched the schedule. I was going to do the Q&A, but this says...
You do the Q&A.
Okay. So, all right.
We delegate.
I was following the script that changed, so I didn't know if Jen wanted to switch it up on us. So we've heard just recently from Matt, we heard Tendaji talk about the P20 spectrum and focusing on student-centered learning. David talked about killing the lions that are killing our kids. Elizabeth talked about the targeting the gaps in outcome equity and how we can lower barriers to success for populations that aren't seeing the outcome. And Megan was talking about fighting the long-term trends, particularly by focusing on youth and their families. So now it's time for the Gen 4 Network and our friends and supporters and people who are here to listen. If you have any questions for our panelists that you've heard from all this conversation, we've got about 12 minutes for Q&A. So the floor is now open to you. Yes.
Okay, so I've got several questions, but I'll just ask one and then ask if anybody else wants. So, well, let me see if I have to pick one.
And you can address to one
Actually, this.
all.
All right. Well, this would be specifically to Elizabeth then. What would you consider to be the best way to measure education outcomes? Since test scores, at least from the information that I have, have proven to be at the very least prejudice based on race. But if it's one of the only sort of objective things that we have, what would you consider to be, if we're, a year from today, we can sit around and pat ourselves on the back because X outcome managed to be achieved if we targeted a specific classroom, let's say?
Sure. Well, Ruth and I work with a number of different programs that might not be employment or education focused per se, but kind of aim to have those type of impacts. And for instance, there might be some youth programs involving arts, as an example. And we're trying to work with them more and more to look at how to track educational outcomes. And a lot of the low-hanging fruit track would be their attendance rate in schools. You know, looking at the beginning when they started their program, how many absences were they having versus, you know, once they've been in it for a while. Looking at their grades, that again might not be the, you know, the ultimate indicator, but certainly students that are at least showing some level of engagement in school and some holding steady or improving their own grades would be one way of looking at is a particular program showing some effectiveness.
Okay.
All right. Great. All right. Yes.
Can I add something to that? She's right on the money. There's a game being played in education, and we have to be very careful about allowing young people as well as older people to be translated into 2 or 3 digit numbers.
Right.
You've got to be very careful. We need to look at some of the non-cognitive kinds of things, the things that tell us that an individual has begun to take control and ownership of their learning and has begun to demonstrate that in a number of ways. Attending school is a big if. And if we can get the students showing up and anxious and willing to try, that's a very big thing that never shows up on test scores. But it does show up in attitude, it does show up in willingness to try. It is about the willingness to take risks when they don't know something. To face that in a classroom situation is a very trying thing for somebody who has not experienced success. So getting students to the point where they can begin to be responsible for their learning, to accept responsibility for their learning, is a major way to measure the impact of services that you're providing. When they have begun to respond in that way, then you know you have made a great deal. You will see grades begin to improve down the road. But the very first thing we've got to do is get the sponge moist before we start realizing how well the sponge is working.
And just real quick, it also helps, is it state funding? I know that the funding is determined on attendance on 2 specific days, is my understanding.
Yeah,
Is that from the state or is that?
State.
Okay, all right, so it would have additional benefits if we could increase.
Absolutely.
Okay, beyond.
But
All
you're also going to see it in not only the attendance, there'll be fewer fights,
Right.
there'll be fewer, just less nonsense, where you have folks who have begun to start working.
Okay.
Great. Shannon.
I just have a quick question in terms of that though, because a program is typically funded by somebody. So I'm just looking at this, trying to get my mind around if we are to fund a program specifically. Are the programs, and I guess this is probably the best question for Elizabeth because you're a funder, and I should ask this of our own, you know, board here at the Community Foundation, but are statistics like that required to be reported back on? Like, is the kid attending school more because they're really interested in the program? Are their grades better from day 1 when they started the program till day 180 when they are finished with school and out for the summer? Did they attend class more? Are their grades better? I mean, do we require that level of reporting and view when you fund a program? That we could go back and say, okay, here are the programs in the area, and here are outcomes that are measurable, that are positive, that these kids, it made a huge difference. Because I feel like we only are measuring really the test scores that are standardized testing and reported by the state. Maybe that's ignorant of me, but.
It certainly can be a funder's prerogative to look at that, and I certainly have had, there's some organizations that have already been tracking that, and so it's, you know, standard operating for them to do so. And there's others where they've really got some youth development purpose, and so I've had to help tease out with them, okay, so what, if you're doing your job effectively, what kind of changes are you going to see in your participants? And it might not all happen overnight, but kind of help them think through what would be some reasonable indicators that aren't too hard to collect. If it is a program where you've got, you know, 30 kids that you're consistently working with over a period of a year or several years, then it's, yeah, I think it's reasonable to work out some agreement that they get the report cards every quarter or something like that, and use that data as part of the reporting that we've built into the grant requirement. You can certainly do that. I think it's oftentimes useful to have that conversation.
But is it easy at our fingertips to get to for this group? Probably not.
You can write it into a grant reporting. I mean, I don't know what the reporting requirements are for a community foundation per se, but I know that for Ruth, there's a grant contract that goes out and says, okay, a year from now, you need to report back on A, B, and C. And if you know, changes in student attendance is something we're interested in, we've certainly put that in there.
We've got time for 2 more questions, and I've seen the hands go up. We've got the gentleman here first, and
I really liked the lion reference. It occurs to me that the only cheetahs that make it to adulthood have a big cheetah looking out for them. I spent a number of years in Atlanta as a public defender, and one of the most successful programs I ever saw for inner city youth was a mentorship program. Kids that are being raised by grandma, who's working 2 jobs, to have a father figure, a mother figure, as a mentor and someone involved and committed long term. Are there any programs that are either existing that could be supported or in the works that would fall along those lines?
David's an expert in mentoring. So
Well, spend a little time there, did you?
Elizabeth made sure I got a check for a little while. Obviously you have, the more formal organizations such as Big Brothers and Big Sisters that do provide mentoring. And then you have what Tendaji and I often talk about, the informal mentoring opportunity. But you're exactly right. I mean, being able to have that set of shoulders, right, to stand on, to see a little bit further, is essentially the difference maker, right? So whether all of us had a formal mentor or informal mentor, we all can point back to that one or two people in our lives that kind of eliminated that line. So, I mean, yes, you have the formal program, but all of us can look at, those ways of being mentors to any and everybody, and we can also mentor institutions to think differently about the way that they utilize their funding. Real quick example, I had, I won't even name the institute, Eastern Michigan University a few years ago, they launched a program for single-parent mothers who wanted to enroll in school. So they had a pot of money specifically for single-parent mothers, right? So on one hand, you could think, well, that's biased, well, why would you do that? But they were trying to point to get those outcomes that Elizabeth were alluding to. If you're a single parent, right, by yourself, that's a barrier in and of itself. So school may not be the first thing on your mind, right? So they had a pot of money specifically designated to help those individuals, and they saw tremendous results. Tremendous results. Earlier this year, I'm a graduate of Bolger University, and they gave me some alumni award earlier in the year. I know it was employed because they wanted me to write a check, whatever. I wrote a check. But one of the things I did, I started a scholarship in my name, right? And I started it in the sense of most scholarships, you get a lot of scholarships for freshmen, freshmen entering school, you get a scholarship. I established what I call a finish line scholarship for that junior or senior who just needs to get over the hump, because getting to school is one thing, but Tendaji can tell you, it's a lot more people that walk through the door that U of M Flint that actually walk out of those doors. And all of us, once you're junior or senior, an extra $1,000 or extra $2,000 could be the difference maker as to whether or not you're going to drop out of school or finish. So it's really about having that mentorship to just encourage people to think differently about the way that they.
So other than Big Brother, Big Sister, is there other programs out there that are
providing mentor program? Oh, definitely. You have small programs such as like Falls Avenue Baptist Church has a program called Brothers Battling Bloodshed. Christ Enrichment Center has programs. Boys and Girls Club actually has mentoring programs. Raise It Up, Youth Arts and Awareness.
How do they advertise for that?
Motherly Intercession.
Yeah, Motherly Intercession, where they help children of incarcerated parents. And I'm glad you said how do they advertise, and I don't want to dominate the conversation, but you get the Boys and Girls Clubs and the Big Brothers and Big Sisters who have the big brand, right? So you can recognize that, but then the small mom and pop, if you will, for lack of better terms, they don't have the resources, right, to advertise in the national brand. So that's the line, right? How do we eliminate that barrier? Because of Big Brothers and Big Sisters, even though I worked there for 7 years, that program wasn't for every kid. Some kid needed a motherly intercession if they had an incarcerated parent. Some kid will benefit better from a Boys and Girls Club or Christ Enrichment Center. So how do we just eliminate the barriers? And if advertising is one, we need to find those smaller programs. And Ruth Mott funds a lot of those programs. And what do we do to support them to get their name on?
All right. We've got a question here.
We went in a totally different direction, but I just wanted to know, what are the indicators that you're looking for then? As a social scientist, I know that, there are things that are unmeasurable that, that are really, really important. But in terms of
qualitative,
there are indicators nevertheless.
Absolutely. So what are those, as a, foundation grant sponsor from the Ruth Mott Foundation, what are the indicators that you're looking for in particular?
Sure. Well,
That's important.
the indicators would depend on, the particular project, but a lot of times, if you're working with somebody who hasn't spent a lot of time in the world of logic models and that sort of thing, you listen to them. You hear what sort of stories they're telling you, and oftentimes it might be, you can translate it back into jargon around changes in knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. So, I mean, those are the indicators that you look for. So if you're looking for how is somebody feeling differently about themselves, then there's certain, you know, you can do pre and post surveys of various sorts, or you can do interviews that kind of look for those sort of themes. So there are ways of tracking it that you can get at some of those more qualitative elements.
I was just thinking with the Flint's community schools, like we're at such a basic level that you could actually do, I mean, studies have shown that just having breakfast in the morning significantly increases, you know, success in school or test scores. Like, why can't we do a pre-test, post-test of whether they've had breakfast? I mean, especially given that SNAP now has been cut for over half of the residents in Genesee County, you know.
I think we've raised a number of tremendously important issues, and I think we are on to probably the topic of our next, one of our next discussions, which is how do we define success of this grant once we know where it's going, and that's a critical issue for us to handle. I see where the time is at, so now I again want to call up Ms. Shannon White.
Now I know what I'm doing.
Yes, she's pre-read what she's supposed to say now, to help us begin to close tonight's meeting.
Okay, so now, thank you, everybody, for coming, first of all, for having lively discussion and for asking the questions. I know there were a lot more hands in the room that didn't get addressed, and so I apologize for that. We know that our community has many needs, and we're grateful for the opportunity to learn more. I hope that this is kind of one of the benefits of the Gen Forward Network that's different than other giving circles, and I'm totally off script now, but this is really where it's meaningful to me, that you can have this kind of conversation, you can have a panel of experts, we can do this again, a deeper dive around issues that this group is committed to or curious about or really passionate about. And so that's the thing that I love about the Gen Forward Network. And so the more members we have, the more available grant making dollars we will give to the community and give to these causes. And so I just one more time encourage you, if you're not a member, join today. There's a couple of iPads floating around. It's super easy. You can do it by credit card online, or you can mail a check to the Community Foundation of Greater Flint. Just in the memo line, put the Gen Forward Network. If every member, again, recruited one friend, we would double our grant making. We're already at 10,000, which is a little over 10,000, which is a pretty sizable amount for our first go-around, which is great. And before I would close, I'm going to ask Dr. Bobby McGhee, who's the chair of the Community Foundation Board of Trustees and a formation committee member of this leadership group, to pose a question that probably can't be answered tonight.
Yeah. In the 30 seconds I have left, ponder this question. Well, first of all, thank you to everybody, our committee, our panelists. I know that each one of you, with your backgrounds, could have spoken for an hour about this topic and still had enough to talk about to go on for longer. I know it's a challenge what we asked you to do, but it's Friday evening and everyone has things they'd like to do, and I very much appreciate all of your presence here, given the fact that it is Friday evening. So the purpose of this part is just to spend a couple minutes to see whether or not there is some amount of consensus that can sort of guide us in one direction. You see up here, these were the priorities that were identified in the survey that was taken, education, youth development, crime and public safety, employment and small business development. So at this point, I would pose the question, where do you think that the first grant should be made to have the greatest impact? You've heard what was said. Everything seemed to gravitate around youth from where I was sitting. But I'd like to open this up just for a couple minutes of discussion to see whether or not maybe we already have consensus and we can start kind of sending out RFPs for requests for grant funding. Any comments, Mark?
So just listening to this conversation, and I've been to several of the City of Flint master planning discussions that they've been having lately, and I feel like one of the largest things that I see here is all of these are really directly related. I mean, the education and the youth development go pretty much hand in hand, because at the education level is somewhere where we can actually take the youth development and utilize it at an institutional level where we already have them in the place, and maybe it's getting them to continue going to their the place of education, but I feel like that's a centered place. And a lot of the crime and public safety things that I've heard from the small community sessions that the city planning was doing, and if Megan were still here, she'd probably touch on this a little bit, was that they see the crime is starting to push down into the younger people. So a lot of the youth are committing a lot of these small crimes, and then the older they grow, the bigger the crime. And the employment, the statistics that we're hearing, you have the highest level is from 16 to 24 of unemployment in Flint, and so we have nowhere for these people to go. We have no jobs for them. We have we have a level of programs for them to do things. So I feel like that might be finding a group or a project that focuses directly on youth development through education might be the best place, I think, to combine the two.
So, just piggybacking off of that, my biggest concern would be where do we start? And unfortunately, to be a borderline callous, the information that I've come into contact with, and it's largely from Freakonomics, is that we can't do high school. At that point, those outcomes are probably already predetermined. There will be a select few people, but especially with such a limited resources that we have, I think we're really talking about elementary or maybe even kindergarten or even pre-K. That would be my suggestion. So
Here.
A couple of our experts said to kind of help momentum that's already going. So I don't know exactly what that would be. I'm not super immersed in what these programs are, but it sounds like there are quite a few programs that are going that, to me, that seems like that's where we can make the greatest impact, is to get in there, and that's what they have said, and they're the experts.
Yeah, on that point, we don't have to worry at this moment about who the grantee will be. I think that this discussion and the next one will probably be about what do we want to do with the funds. And then the community foundation staff, we're used to receiving requests for funding. We can find, if there is somebody out there in the community to address that issue the way that we want it addressed, we can find that existing program. So it's a good point, but I think we can accomplish that. Craig?
I think one of the easiest sources to both plug in to the necessary clientele, so to speak, and to have an accountable, accessible application of a grant would be to go to someone like Jenny Barkey. The probate or family court, these kids that are going through the system, they can be court ordered to go through this program or that, and if there's a grant, that's something that the courts will absolutely work with us with. And if you have a program like that, and you have specific criteria of who would qualify, what kind of circumstances would be appropriate for this kind of program, whether it's a mentoring program, educational program, whatever, to go to something through something like the juvenile courts, you can get kids mandated that need help and aren't getting it because there aren't the resources within the county, within that budget, to set up specific programs. You couldn't necessarily take everyone, but it could be a special program, and it would be a very easy means of getting to the right people and having a measurable result.
I kind of look at it and I start to think about just different dominant companies throughout our country, and I think about what made them dominant, and I think we have limited resources, so where should we focus? And the thing that made those people dominant was not necessarily the product that they had, but how they advertised it. So if we can do some type of a successful advertising, something for mentoring, to be able to get a lot of people involved. I mean, $10,000 isn't going to do a whole lot for any single program, but if we can touch other people to say, hey, let's join, let's mentor, let's do these and make it bigger, to advertise, I think might be a pretty neat way to be able to impact a program.
I think one of the things we need to consider is long-term mentoring. One of the problems that we have with programs that are compartmentalized is that we handle third graders. The third graders come in and we do just a bang-up job with those third graders. We don't have a fourth grade program. Programs that handle the same children for a long period of time, like Motherly Intercession, who have these children for 10 or 12 years, and they may just have 30 children. I would rather invest $10,000 on 30 children and see them from age 5 to 18 than handle 400 third graders.
Right, so that's, one of my other questions was gonna be, obviously, I think we can all agree that $10,000 a year could greatly impact one person's life. But it's not going to potentially have that much of an impact on 10,000 people's lives, right? So that was one of the questions, and I don't know if this is appropriate for this particular conversation, but if we look at sort of scope,
So it is appropriate, and it's a decision that we will have to make collectively, the members of this organization, and we can decide to focus our impact on 30 people, diffuse it where we give $1 a piece for 10,000 people, and then we can decide whether or not we want to have a sustained impact for multiple years, right? We can pick a theme and stick with that theme for 3 or 4 years and look for progression of our impact. But that's all very much up in the air. We're going to start to wrap this up. Ridgeway.
Is your plan to solicit sort of RFPs from all the different organizations or nonprofits in town with existing programs, or do you want to create a framework or a guideline for one of those organizations to create a program that's unique to this?
So depending on what our focus ends up being after this discussion and the next one, if it is something that can be met by existing organizations and what they're already doing, then we'll ask for RFPs. If it's something that's so out of the box that nobody is doing it, then I suppose we can go out there and try it, which is much harder to do, obviously, but prefer the former, obviously. And there's so many nonprofits in the community, it may be hard to find something that's not already being done, we just have to look.